Water Well Drillers Advisory Council is called to order. We'll now do a roll call of the Advisory Council. Mr. Gilmore.
Here.
Mr. Pyburn.
Present.
Lonnie Ball. Mr. Wisnott.
Here.
Mr. Lange.
Here.
We have a quorum. Presentations of the water well related groundwater commingling issues by the Regulatory Program Management Division staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Lee Parham. I'm the Deputy Director of the Regulatory Program Management Division, and I really want to welcome everybody to this summit. I believe it's the first one that we've had with the water well program. We appreciate your time, and we want you to be a part of this information gathering process that we're doing now. And the information that we gather could possibly, with the council's input, could be some recommendations for some regulatory changes, possibility. The water well driller program staff will be giving a couple of presentations. The first one is going to be David Gunn. He's the program manager. He'll provide an overview of the council work group process, determinations, and the information gathered so far. Basically how we got here where we are today. The next presentation will be Adam Foster. He's our program hydrologist, and he's going to go over the current water well construction standards for wells encountering injurious water. It's the current construction specs. Now, upon conclusion of that portion of the presentations, we'll move to the next agenda item, which is C, and that's the open forum discussion on the information gathered by the council work group and any recommendations for improving regulatory efforts. If you plan on speaking, we'll need you to fill out a public comment form. Depending on how many we have, we're looking at 3 minutes, to get up there and say your piece. If you need to go over a little bit, that's fine. I know we said 5, but it could be 3 to 5. So with that said, David, you want to take over?
Okay, my name is David Gunn, and I'm going to provide an overview of the process that we went through with the Water Advisory Council Groundwater Commingling Work Group process, determination and information gathered. On January the 5th, 2018.
David, sorry, Mary Winston here. Pull it a little closer. We can't hear you. Oh, here goes Terry. Okay.
Wait a minute till I got. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
All right. On January 5th, maybe it's too close. The Water Well Driller Advisory Council created a work group to address the groundwater commingling issue. On February the 9th, the work group consisting of Steve Young, Ray Reed, Ray Wisnott, and Bill Lange, and department staff, myself, Adam Foster, General Counsel Della Lindquist, and Yvonne Lopez met. The work group discussed the issues and the public comments made at the work group meeting. The work group developed 5 areas of concern relating to the commingling of groundwater. The first was define groundwater degradation. Second was identify the amount of time and what conditions must be met for test wells to stay open. Number three, what is the minimum well construction standards to produce brackish water? Number four, would mixing 2,000 milligrams per liter TDS with 30,000 milligrams per liter brackish water be considered commingling? And the last, number five, was define aquifers and zones. Staff had put together some information on each of these five items. Number one, define degradation. There is no current definition of degradation. However, it was suggested that we use the definition of pollution instead of degradation. The current rules define pollution as the alteration of physical, thermal, chemical, biological quality of, or the contamination of any waters that render the water harmful, detrimental, or injurious to humans, animals, vegetations, or property, or to public health, safety, or welfare, or impairs the usefulness of the public enjoyment of the water for any or reasonable purposes. Under Chapter 76-100 currently states that all wells shall be completed so that aquifers or zones containing waters that differ in chemical quality are not allowed to commingle in the casing, the borehole annulus, or the filter pack and cause quality degradation to any aquifer or zone. Number two, identify the amount of time and what conditions must be met for a test well to stay open. Staff believes that this is best kept to the variance process that we currently use, so that the conditions can be considered on a case-by-case basis. Test well is defined under Chapter 76-10, paragraph 51, and 76-100, paragraph C6, as a well to explore for groundwater. It was suggested that TDLR add a waiver process to allow an owner to request a test well to remain open for a longer period of time. Chapter 76-109 regarding the technical requirements for variances state in relevant part, if a party having a well drilled, deepened, or altered, or the licensed well driller or the party, landowner, or person drilling or plugging the well finds any of the procedures prescribed by Chapter 76-100 technical requirements through 76-105 technical requirements for wells before June 1 of 1983, inapplicable, unworkable, or inadequate combination of the prescribed procedures or alternative procedures may be employed, provided that the proposed alternative procedures will prevent injury and pollution. Staff contends that since a test well falls under Chapter 76C6, a person could request a variance to allow the test well to remain open for an extended period of time. The conditions would be considered on a case-by-case basis, with the goals of ensuring groundwater protection as the main factor. Number three, what are the minimum construction standards to produce brackish water? There is no current definition of brackish water in our rules. However, there is a definition of injurious water. This is addressed in the current administrative rules for wells producing injurious water under Chapter 76-101, technical requirements, standards of completion of water wells encountering water injurious to vegetation, land, or other water. Since brackish water is injurious water, this falls under the standards of Chapter 76, 101, paragraph A2, which states, as quickly as possible, plug, repair, or properly complete a well pursuant to the standards adopted by the Commission in order to avoid injury or pollution. The current rules require that wells be completed so that injurious water or brackish water is confined to the zone of origin. Number 4, would mixing 20,000 milligrams per liter with 30,000 milligrams per liter of brackish water be considered commingling? Yes. It has been suggested by several persons who responded. Doing this would fall under the definition of commingling and pollution. Therefore, a driller or landowner would violate the current rules if they mix the two types of groundwater. The aquifers or zones should be confined to the zone of origin. Number 5, define aquifers or zones. It was suggested by multiple agencies and persons that we need to use the Texas Water Development Board definition of aquifers or zones as consisting of 9 major aquifers that produce large amounts of water through wells and springs over large areas, and 21 minor aquifers that produce minor amount of water through wells and springs over large areas, or large amounts of water through wells and springs over small areas. The USGS defines an aquifer as a geological formation that is water-bearing. A geological formation or structure that stores and or transmits water, such as to wells and springs. The use of this term is usually restricted to those water-bearing formations capable of yielding water in sufficient quantities to wells and springs to constitute a usable supply. On March 7th, program staff sent letters and emails to the Texas Groundwater Association, Railroad Commission, Texas Desalination Association, the Texas Water Development Board, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, the Texas Groundwater Protection Committee, and the Texas Oil and Gas Association. In the letter and email, we were asking for each agency or association to provide a representative to give input on the groundwater issues. We asked that they respond no later than March 30th of 2018. The goal was to gather as much input as possible to address the 5 areas of concern and determine whether the current rules and laws address these concerns or if new rules would need to be adopted. The response we received are part of the information packet that the council received prior to this meeting. We received written responses from some who would like to have more stakeholder meetings and invite other interested parties, such as landowners or representatives of landowners. Examples provided of who they would like to invite are the Texas Farm Bureau or the Texas and Southwestern Cattle Association. The program staff is considering the suggestion and will take appropriate action to possibly facilitate this endeavor. Another suggestion was received was to adopt a water classification system that defines water quality in terms of total dissolved solids, TDS. For example, 0 to 1,000 TDS would be considered fresh, 1,000 to 3,000 slightly saline, 3,000 to 10,000 moderately saline, and more than 10,000 very saline to brine. However, it was stated that this classification was adopted prior to desalination becoming economically feasible. This system is used by multiple agencies and this program. On June 20th, 2018, program staff sent a follow-up email to interested party and the water well driller work group, informing them of this meeting and inviting anyone to present their thoughts on the groundwater issues. In the email, we allotted 5 minutes to each to present their thoughts on the 5 areas of concern and requested that they respond by July the 6th, 2018. By that deadline, we did not receive any responses. However, after the above deadline expired, we received a couple of requests to provide more information. Therefore, at the start of the open forum discussion, we will call up those who have signed up to speak and allow them 3 to 5 minutes to present their thoughts prior to going into open forum discussion. This completes my commingling issue presentation that was brought to the attention of the work group meeting. Now, Mr. Adam Foster, staff hydrologist, will show a short presentation with diagrams on proper completion of wells which encounter injurious water. At the completion of that presentation, we will take any questions. Adam?
Hey, Adam, hold up for just a second. This is Lee Parham. Can we recognize Mr. Reed, Ray Reed? To your left.
Ray joined us.
Oh.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Ray Reed is present.
Sorry for being late.
Go ahead.
All right, my name's Adam Foster. I'm staff hydrologist for the Water Well Driller program. Today, basically, I just want to show a short presentation on the definitions and the construction standards that are applicable to the issue of commingling. First couple definitions. The definition of commingling is the mixing, mingling, blending, or combining through the borehole casing annulus or the filter pack of waters that differ in chemical quality, which causes quality degradation on any aquifer or zone. Another one that's applicable is completed to produce undesirable water. And we'll show a diagram about this in a couple of slides. A completed well which is designed to extract water from a zone which contains injurious water. Freshwater, water whose bacterial, physical, and chemical properties are such that it is suitable and feasible for beneficial use. Injurious water, water that is harmful to vegetation, land, or other water as set forth in the laws 1901 and 1902. And then finally, the definition of pollution is the alteration of the physical, thermal, chemical, or biological quality of, or the contamination of any water that renders the water harmful, detrimental, or injurious to humans, animals, vegetation, or property, or to public health, safety, or welfare, or impairs the usefulness or the public enjoyment of water for any Okay, so here's a diagram illustrating, it's kind of hard to see on this slide, backwards, but here's a case where the driller drills through a fresh or good water zone into a injurious water or saline, high saline water zone. At that point, the driller can complete the well in the aquifer, the freshwater aquifer, but he's got to seal off that bottom zone. And the way he has to do that is he's got to pressure grout from bottom to top with either cement or bentonite. Now, he cannot use bentonite if chlorides are above 1,500 milligrams per liter or hydrocarbons are present. Now, if the entire zone is not groutable, the driller has to do everything he can to grout as much of the borehole or the annulus as that he can. And then he can go ahead and he can complete the well in the freshwater zone. Here's an example where the driller or the water well is actually constructed to produce from a bad water zone or injurious water zone. If there's any fresh water or any other aquifers overlaying that zone, the driller has to seal off those zones to protect the good water zone. And depending on the pressures down there, if the driller does not seal off those freshwater zones correctly, then that injurious water, or the bad water, can actually come up and infiltrate into the fresh aquifer. So he needs to do everything he can to seal that off, okay? And again, it's pressure grouting methods is the only way that that person or the driller can do that. I think I skipped one. Okay, I'm sorry, I skipped a zone. Here's the example of a driller drills through a bad water zone or injurious water zone into a freshwater zone or usable water zone. The driller must seal off that injurious water zone above it to protect the freshwater zone. This would be the case of polluted water, injurious water, anything that has different chemical quality than the freshwater zone. And again, the driller must pressure grout that zone or that borehole annulus to protect the freshwater zone. Now, if the entire annulus is not groutable, the driller must grout the area of the annular space which is groutable. This would be an example like Karst Systems, the Edwards Aquifer Authority, somewhere in the Edwards Trinity Aquifer. So those are our current rules that are applicable to the commingling issue.
Okay, if the council has any questions for Adam or myself, we'll take those. If not, we'll move on to the next.
Just one question. So we had no responses. You mentioned that the letters that went out, we had no responses from those.
On giving a presentation at this
Okay,
summit
but
meeting.
there was comment on the process.
Yes,
Okay,
absolutely.
so we'll get that later then.
That's included in your packet. I just summarized some of the responses that we received when I went through the 5 areas of concern. We received letters from almost everybody that we sent to, except for the Railroad Commission.
That's the reason I asked the question. Thank you.
Honey?
Now we'll have open forum discussion. We have actually 3 speakers. One of them is speaking for 2 different groups. We'll start with Leah Adams. Please state your name and tell us which group you'll be speaking for. And if you choose to continue and speak for the other one at the same time, please
Okay.
do so.
My name is Leah Adams, and I'm with Panola County Groundwater Conservation District. I'm also on the executive committee for the Texas Alliance of Groundwater Districts. As you may know, I will speak for TAG first. TAG is a 501c3 that was established in 1988 with the purpose of supporting groundwater conservation districts to help them stay current on groundwater science, policy, and management. TAG has an appointed member to the Texas Groundwater Protection Committee, and we represent 85 GCDs and 43 associate members and operate by way of active committees. One of those committees is our Groundwater Protection Committee, made up of at least 15 GCD members. That committee provided preliminary comments to you in March regarding TDLR's groundwater commingling task force discussions on the groundwater commingling issue. TAG's position on the possibility of rule amendments is the following. We believe that strong TDLR rules are necessary in order to protect the groundwater, and that any revision to current statutes should be considered in the context of what the proposed amendment seeks to achieve. While we would have concerns about amendments to current statute that would make them less restrictive, we also identify opportunities for stronger protection of the groundwater. Some of these opportunities and questions have been included in our letter and preliminary input, which I've brought copies of today if anybody needs a copy. Some of the issues, the questions that were asked of the task force or the committee was to define degradation as far as, and I think a lot of that has already been covered by David Gunn's presentation. The amount of time a test well should stay open and things like that. And like I said, TAG's position on this would be that whatever, we welcome any improvements or anything that would protect the groundwater, but we need to see what those revisions are and see if we can understand how they affect the groundwater as they're implemented.
Any of the council members have questions? If not,
Specifically, in my district, the Panola County Groundwater Conservation District, we are a very rich oil and gas district. For the past couple of years, up until currently, almost 60% of all the water use in our county has been used for oil and gas production, mainly fracking, hydraulic fracturing in the district. We only have about 804 square miles, not including the lakes in our county, but the county is in the Sabine uplift of the Carrizo-Wilcox Aquifer, specifically as identified by the 9 layers of Texas Water Development Board. We basically have the upper, lower, and middle Wilcox in some areas of the county. Some we don't have all 3, some we have, only 2 of them, but it's basically the Wilcox. Our water levels go anywhere from 9 foot at the surface down to approximately 700-800 feet, which is not very deep wells. And part of the problem that we have is that our sands are not very water bearing. Our average gallon per minute production on most wells is 60 gallons per minute. So even a 6-inch well, it sometimes will only produce 40 or 60 gallons a minute in our area, even if they screened through the entire 300-400 foot of sands layers that are intermittent with clay and different layers to produce water. For that reason, and because of the volume needed by oil and gas, a lot of times oil and gas industries will actually screen from 10 foot at the top where the atmospheric barrier starts all the way down to the bottom of the well casing. But the problem that we have is that the 10-foot atmospheric barrier, the annulus is not sealed in any way, shape, or form, which allows not only contamination from the surface if it gets past the 10-foot atmospheric barrier, but it also allows for any bearing sands within that to travel down into the aquifer at any layer, in any position. So our biggest concern is while we don't have separate defined aquifers like the Queen City and the Carrizo that can be specifically defined by a specific delineated layer in the aquifer, we have a lot of different water qualities that could not only be potentially polluted from surface spills, which is actually our #1 pollutant in the county, but it also allows for all the different sands that are intermittent through the Wilcox to be able to be commingled together into the, all into one aquifer. While some may consider certain issues injurious, my question would be, how do we know if they're injurious? The sulfur and iron include in that injurious definition because, we may have some sands that don't have as much water. When a driller drills, how do they know if they actually contact the injurious waters as they're drilling through them, depending on what they are? There's no requirement to be tested or to be analyzed or to ensure that they're not doing that. And when they screen multiple sands together, even within the same aquifer, how do we know they're not actually commingling those together? And after the wells are drilled and produced, it can be difficult to determine that at that point, and expensive to some extent. So our concern is, while, this may be a localized issue to Panola County, our concern is that it is an issue for us and something that we have long wanted either further definition or at least assistance in being able to identify and make sure that they're sealing off the annulus if needed or protecting our groundwater as much as possible.
Any questions?
I have a question. On your, in your water district, I guess would be the best way to say it, but how involved is your water district in when someone files for a permit to drill a well? How involved you are to make sure that that is drilled and it doesn't encounter injurious water? Do you do any pre-drill testing or testing of any kind to make sure that well doesn't encounter injurious water?
Well, that goes back to kind of how do we know that? TPH and BTEX are not known unless you test for them. I mean, you can't smell them, you can't see them. I know that we have a natural issue with methane, biogenic methane in our county, which it has to be vented quite often. But how do you tell the difference between biogenic and thermogenic methane if you're just on the drilling location without testing it? We do have a full-time employee that goes out to all of the locations and inspects them to make sure they meet TDLR requirements. We also, he's on scene during pluggings and drillings to make sure that they are following all of TDLR's requirements and regulations. Our district itself does not have anything, any rules that go beyond that. I have board members that have wanted that for a long time, but we still have, a lot of these questions about how do you define injurious? Specifically, how does that impact our aquifer and testing, and how do we know if it's injurious, that kind of thing, so.
Those people that are on those sites like that, who bears that cost
For
for your people that are on
we
your
don't
site?
charge for that. It's a service that we provide for free to the community as a taxing entity for the district.
I see, okay.
Are you on site on the all field supply wells or just the domestic wells and stuff?
We do more of the oil field supply wells, but often it's some of the same drillers. So, as long as they're in compliance with TDLR rules and our rules, which mirror the TDLR requirements, we pretty much, it's kind of, we can't be at every single drill that we, last month we had 26 wells drilled in our county, water wells, but he's at a lot of them.
You mentioned atmospheric barrier considerations or concerns. As I understand it, it's, the rules that we proclamate here are minimums, isn't that right, David?
Yes.
So wouldn't your district have the ability to require something more than the minimum?
We do, and it's actually it's been a point of discussion in our board for a very long time. Part of the issue we battle is the additional cement cost that's gonna be added to, because that'll be passed on to the domestic landowners and the, whether it's a domestic well or a oil and gas well, they're pretty much all drilled to about 350 feet, which to us is about average. We could do that. We have hoped that we could get more support through the state organization that would help us at least fill that annular space requirement when needed. We have some landowners that do it, we recommend it, and they do it voluntarily if we can get them to do it. But oil and gas doesn't, because they're not required by state law, we would have to
But
They
I
have
bel-
to follow the same
They-
rules as,
Yes,
Yeah.
we would have to change our rules to do that, and we have thought about that. Our concern is, at this point, how do we identify injurious water? How do we know, the cost of having to test it to ensure that it's not injurious? There's a lot of unanswered questions that we have about what impact that would have on the community and the economic viability of producing oil and gas in that area.
What's in your water district, has there been any history of where injurious water is located within your district? And has that been followed up with as far as being able to document where that injurious water is? So maybe you have an idea when you're in there drilling that we might need to do some pre-drill testing on that? Is that?
We do have some areas where we have a documented issue with thermogenic gas or some type of contamination. Those were easy to, if we have a domestic well that wants to be drilled in that area. We had one yesterday that my field tech was on location to ensure that, everything was followed appropriately. They did cement the entire annular seal down to the screen on that one to make sure that nothing happened by the landowner. The landowner bore the cost of that to ensure they had good water. Because they had another well on the location that went bad, that became up contaminated somehow. And, the oil and gas company that was in the area actually is no longer in business, and it's an abandoned well. We have a lot of, because we've had a lot of oil and gas production since the 40s in Panola County. So, the district works hard to try to prevent that if we can, but because our aquifer is what I like to call splotchy, for lack of a better geological term.
That's a new one on
I
that.
hadn't heard that one, no.
It is not as, layered. There's not a lot of layers that, you can drill one area 300 feet and hit 5 10-foot sands, and then move over 100 foot and hit 3 5-foot sands, differently. So that's part of the problem, is there's no specific delineation between the upper and lower, or the middle and lower Wilcox, to where we could actually say this is of different water quality. And that's why the testing is important in that area. And it may be a geographical specific issue that we need to address locally. And if it is, we'll certainly welcome that to try to protect the groundwater. And I guess what I'm looking for is some expertise and help from TDLR to help define what some of those are, so we can work within those parameters.
Mr. Chairman, this is Lee Parham. David's group can certainly work with Panola County on the information they're looking for.
Okay.
Does Panola County, the groundwater district, have a staff hydrologist?
No, sir, we do not. Our budget is, this year, we're oil and gas dependent. Our budget this year, we cut almost $50,000 out of our budget, plus we lost $13,000 to a refund to a taxing entity that negotiated through legal issues. We lost $13,000 out of our current budget of $325,000 currently. We have 4 staff. We own the building we live in, so, most of our hydrology comes from donations provided by oil and gas industry that we apply to learning more about our aquifer so we can understand how to protect it better.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, and forgive me if I mispronounce your name, Amanda Malakas. State your name and who you will be speaking for.
My name is Amanda Malukas. I'm the general manager of the Rusk County Groundwater Conservation District. Thank you for your time this morning and be able to discuss this subject with you. What I would like to do today is provide you with a little overview of how our district addresses commingling, utilizing the current Chapter 76 language that we have found adequate and how it applies to freshwater. A little bit about myself. In my previous careers, I do have a couple of different TCQ occupational licenses. I am a groundwater operator. I have former water well experience with other entities across the state and New Mexico. One of them formerly working with the San Antonio Water System in their water well division. And so some of the practices we have at our district actually are a combination of what I've pulled from experience over the years that I've brought here to Russ County Groundwater. So we apply TDLR regulations on a local level through our district rules. We work closely with TDLR. We will work with Mr. Foster in the field, who'll come up and visit with us. And we apply our own commingling prevention program to preserve and protect our area aquifers. We're actually located right next to Panola County. If you're not familiar with where Russ County is, our office is in Henderson, Texas. We are east of Tyler, south of Longview. I give you that information because most people don't know where Henderson, Texas is. We are positioned on the Carrizo-Wilcox Aquifer. We have outcrop of the Carrizo-Wilcox in the eastern portions of the county, where on the western portions of the county, we have subcropped zones of the Carrizo-Wilcox, and then along the southern portions of the county runs across the Mount Enterprise Fault Zone. So in those areas, those are the areas that we are focusing on commingling. Due to geologic units that are overlying the Carrizo-Wilcox. So some of those overlying units can produce excessive iron concentrations, high sulfate concentrations, pH levels outside of secondary drinking standards. And some areas may be more susceptible to surface water influence. And some of those overlying units, just so you're familiar with them, are Queen City sands, Sparta, Letchis, Red Claw sands, and then across the entire county, intermittent alluvium units. So a brief overview of our district's efforts to prevent commingling in those areas is we perform downhole inspections. We have a very good relationship with our oil and gas companies in the area. We have a lot of oil and gas. East Texas Oil Field is located in Russ County. And a very good relationship with our local water well drillers in the area. Oil and gas, since 2007, has volunteered over 100 static water wells for us to collect water level data from throughout the years, and all of those wells have been inspected downhole. And those inspections assist the company in taking liability away from them if they possibly want to transfer that water well over to the landowner, because we have a lot of landowners that are interested in those water wells afterwards. Those downhole inspections consist of a basic surface inspection that you may be familiar with, sending a camera downhole to check the integrity of the casing, integrity of the screen, stuff that maybe our E-log unit would not pick up. That's our last tool that we send down, is our geophysical E-log unit. I believe you would be familiar with that. The E-log unit is showing us the different lithological interval data that well is passing through as we are going down that well. So those E-logs are conducted by staff, myself, or our field technician. Those E-logs are evaluated then by a professional engineer or geologist that we send off for as a third party. And if communication is possibly found in those E-logs of different water qualities, say possibly between Red Claw and Carrizo, or Queen City and Carrizo-Wilcox, then we would follow up with possible enforcement, whether repair or plugging. And usually then, before going through enforcement, I will send that to TDLR just for verification, say, what are your thoughts on this? Is this something that we should pursue towards prevention of commingling and sealing off these zones? And like I said, we're doing that for sound integrity of the well itself, protecting the water quality, not mixing those different water chemistries that they could be coming across, to prevent that communication of different water qualities or contamination. Basically, those sources for public health and safety is what it all comes back to, as we know. There are different entities across the state that provide similar services, and if they're not providing a service quite like we're providing, then it may be in their rules written in that whenever the new well is constructed, they have to have a third party E-log that well to show if there's any possible communication and if that driller can seal off that zone. So the current rules, water well driller pump installer rules of Chapter 76, the concerns that have been brought up about altering the definitions that are addressed by the current rules, They were originally established to prevent two different water sources, aquifers, or qualities from communicating to prevent possible unforeseen water quality results that really go beyond the individual water quality parameters of just TDS. In closing, the ultimate goal that we see is to preserve the integrity of the hydrological units or layers, and the current rules appear to support that objective in how we operate in our district in preventing communication. From working with these rules on a regular basis for about 10 years myself, the rules are incorporated into our district practices. We obtain sound science in the field and obtain professional support and evaluations of the lithological units. Our district supports maintaining the current language for continued preservation of our groundwater resources in Russ County, and we encourage this discussion process for any possible advancements in the rules.
Sounds like y'all are doing a pretty good job.
We try. Thank you.
There is a lot of water districts out in West Texas where they're not open but 2 days a week, or got one staff member, and lots of places, and that's not done right, so.
We have a very small budget. We are a taxing entity, so we're highly with large oil and gas. We are highly influenced by that economy and some other taxable properties in Russ County. And actually, this past year, we were predicted to bring in a tax revenue of about $160,000. And in previous years, we've maintained around $200,000. So we do work on a very limited, tight budget. We try to squeeze every penny we can out of it. We have 2 full-time staff members and 1 part-time field tech.
You mentioned that y'all are adjacent to or neighbors near the Panola district?
Yes, they are our eastern neighbor.
And are you familiar with their enabling legislation compared to your own?
Not currently, no, sir.
I
believe it is
think I
similar
understood
in
they're
nature.
both taxing authorities.
Yes, we are both taxing entities.
Do you two ladies know each other very well?
We do. We work together quite frequently. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker, Corey Pomeroy. Please state your name and who you're representing.
Good morning. My name is Corey Pomeroy. I'm Vice President and General Counsel of the Texas Oil and Gas Association. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you this morning. Just by way of background, because we've not been in front of you before, the Texas Oil and Gas Association, known as TexOGA, is a nonprofit corporation that represents all facets of the oil and natural gas industry in Texas. We produce in excess of 90% of the crude oil production, crude oil and natural gas production. Our membership operates nearly 100% of the state's refining capacity, and is responsible for a vast majority of the state's network of pipelines. In 2017, the fiscal year of it, the oil and natural gas industry supported 308,000 direct jobs and paid over $11 billion in state taxes and state royalties, which goes to support emergency responders, our state schools, and the roads that we drive on. Water is critical for the development of oil and gas. Our industry uses less than 1% of Texas water in our exploration and production activities. We've, over the years, heard of the desire of the public to focus on the production of brackish water to use in our activities. And so over 20% of the water that's used in E&P is either from brackish sources, from water that is recycled from other sources, or from water that's reused from E&P activities. The issue of water quality is one that's very important to our membership. We know that many agencies are looking at the protection of water quality in the state of Texas, TDLR being one of them, but In addition to that, TDLR, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, the Railroad Commission of Texas, the Water Development Board, as well as many other agencies participate on the Texas Groundwater Protection Committee, which is a statutorily appointed body that coordinates state agency actions for the protection of groundwater in the state and to ensure that the quality of groundwater is not degraded. The TCQ is the chair of that committee. In terms of regulation, the Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, as a standalone entity, its jurisdiction is limited to the licensing of water well drillers and pump installers, and for establishing standards and procedures for marking, completing, repairing, and plugging in certain circumstances water wells and the technical specifications for materials and design. Along those lines, and relevant to the questions posed by the work group, is that the mixing and commingling of two brackish waters, we believe, does not degrade groundwater in the state because it doesn't impact the groundwater quality of a aquifer zone. I just wanted to make those short comments this morning to you. Look forward to the rest of the discussion today and happy to answer any questions you might have today and going forward.
Does the council have questions?
Yeah, just a curious question. I'm not terribly familiar with your association, so I'm judging by the numbers that you gave that you probably have the majority of oil and gas producers in the state of Texas as members of your association.
That's correct.
My points of association go back through the Texas Groundwater Association. So as I understood your statement of opinion, you feel like some of the considerations that we're here to take up today, you do not agree with some of the general classifications in brackish water or the comparison to fresh water also?
I think that the way the statute and the rules are is that the rules contemplated freshwater on not freshwater sources and not necessarily on brackish to brackish.
Okay. Now, you mentioned that about 1% of the state's groundwater is probably used in oil production, gas production, correct?
Correct.
Okay. What portion of that comes from a soil boring,
A soil boring?
a well?
I don't have the numbers, but a good bit of it does.
Probably a simple majority, a major portion?
I don't know, but I can go back and look and see what
Yeah.
our
I
statistics.
think that'd be a statistic this group would be interested in.
Okay.
Also, when you drill an oil well, is it cemented top to bottom, or is it just cemented on the bottom where the production is?
For an oil well?
Yeah,
There's
surface case.
surface casing, intermediate casing, long casing. I think importantly, Rule 13 of you're talking about an oil and gas well.
Yes.
Yeah, the Rule 13 at this Railroad Commission of Texas was amended in, I believe, 2013 to modernize and update the technical specifications of how a oil and gas well would be cased. We believe that, and all parts of the industry were involved. We believe it's one of the best in the world in terms of ensuring that the wellbore integrity is sound. The groundwater advisory unit of the Railroad Commission has to stamp applications to construct injection wells, disposal wells, and I also believe for oil and gas wells to ensure that casing is sufficient through freshwater zones.
I know the casing is, but in the old days, a lot of times the casing on an oil well would just cement it maybe 1,000 foot on the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was 3,000 foot that didn't have any cement around with water zones and stuff commingling for years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
I didn't know if they've changed the rules on that, where they cement them top to bottom now or not.
in 2013 there was a fairly aggressive rewrite, modernization of that rule, and I'd be happy to get you more information that.
Well, I work in the oil field, I preset surface pipe for rigs and stuff, but I know they pull casing out of oil wells, and if they pull it, it's not cemented, so I'm just curious if they've changed the rules or not.
Mhm.
The real question is about the annular integrity of the well bore
Mhm.
outside the casing.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Our next speaker, Raymond Straub.
Good morning, gentlemen of the board.
State your name, who you're speaking for.
My name is Raymond Straub. I'm with Straub Corporation. I'm a licensed professional geoscientist in Texas. I'm also a licensed master driller and master pump installer. I am the executive secretary on Region F Water Conservation, or Water Planning Group, and I'm also secretary of the Permian Basin Underground Water Conservation District. I'm not speaking on behalf of the district or the region, but I am speaking as a professional scientist and drilling contractor. I don't know if you received the information that I had sent in April. I don't know if you all had read that. I had submitted it to the TDLR as potential information for, in a request for guidance on brackish and commingling. Is that something that you may have seen or may not have seen?
We haven't seen that.
I don't think I got it individually.
No.
It was a pretty long request. I don't think I'll take the time to read it right now, but I will hit some of the high spots, and maybe we can at least work through it, or start the process of working through it. I work in the oil and gas sector. I work in the environmental sector, and I also permit wells, and I assist other contractors and other regulators with looking at aquifer characteristics as well as formational configurations within different well designs. So I can't speak to Wilcox or Gulf Coast or East Texas, but I can speak specifically to Permian Basin, to the Midland Basin, Delaware Basin, aquifer systems, how they're designed, what zones are potentially fresh, what zones are brackish, what zones are saline. And we have a disproportionate problem in the Permian with drillers not understanding the zones in which they're penetrating and how to properly complete those, how to seal them off. Years ago, a few years back, I would have never believed that I could see the kind of damage these guys are doing. Some of these are really qualified people, and there's a good portion of that are unqualified people. Legacy, we used to couldn't reach the formations that we're capable of reaching today as a standard licensee. I mean, if you could reach 1,000 foot with some of your equipment, historically, that was a pretty good depth. Well, nowadays, we have contractors that 6,000 foot is not outside of their capabilities, but they don't possess the understanding of the formations or the skills to recognize those formations. And so they're creating severe problems. I wish I could tell you how many times just this last year alone that I've read logs for people, and they were hundreds of feet beyond where they're supposed to be, commingling salt zones, complete salt zones, with water producing zones, and completely oblivious to the fact that they're doing so. Commingling class 1 aquifers with class 2 aquifers, class 3 aquifers, all screened together in a common bore with no cement whatsoever anywhere. Freestanding pipe bouncing in the hole that's 1,500 foot deep. I mean, it's rampant, and we've got to set up some really good guidance and try to get some handle on this. In our district alone, we're permitting 150 wells a month. in 2 counties. And we're seeing the same kind of activities within Ector County, Midland County, Upton County, Ward County, Loving County. It's like a sewing machine. There's just wells packed and stacked, and some of them are unbelievably commingling. They're going after our minor aquifers for brackish water. And House Bill 30 allows and established this brackish water zones for production, specifically for oil and gas operators, so they would not target our freshwater zones. But we're not getting those isolations. We're not setting surface. A good majority of guys are top-loading sackcrete as their method for sealing these wells. And you're all contractors. You all know that that's not the way you do it, but that's a common method. You've got a 1,000-foot well with a Class 1 aquifer, and you're dumping sackcrete from the surface in as your sealant. What's the chances of that commingling? What's the chances of that sackcrete even reaching the bottom? In our district, we've established a protocol that you have to fill out a W-15 Railroad Commission form certifying that you have cemented off your freshwater interval. And that's just one more, it's a paper layer. It really doesn't mean anything. But if you fill it out and you sign it, then you've created a crime if you have not actually followed through with that. It's actually a crime to submit a document to a state agency falsely. And that, again, it's a paper effort. But if you're found to have violated that, at least you have a criminal offense that someone can go after. I don't say that we have all the answers, and I'm certainly hoping that the board can lend a solid ear to creating guidance and regulations so we can tighten some of this stuff up. Gentlemen?
Well, I'm looking forward to looking at your request for the rules that, or the piece that the work group had put out there to study. Right now, do you feel like there needs to be some big revisions in those 5 points that the work group brought up? Is that correct?
Yes, sir. As a drilling contractor, I would take it as an affrontment for someone to tell me that I couldn't do my job in a professional manner or qualified manner. But as a scientist, someone who is responsible for the protection of water, and as an elected official who is responsible for that, unfortunately, our drilling contractors are not doing a satisfactory job of recognizing freshwater and brackish water and preventing the commingling of those. And though it pains me, I would suggest that perhaps once we leave fresh water, that there needs to be another layer of regulatory guidance, or at least supervisory guidance, when it comes to designating those zones and sealing those off, whether that comes from a district, whether it comes from another licensed professional, someone to give a margin of safety so that it's not just on the least common denominator, not on the man on the step to decide as he's drilling the well where to stop at. We need comprehensive guidance that says, there's going to have to be somebody with another set of eyes who's skilled at recognizing these. Even a pre-drill where you know the formations and depths you're going to, that's not a complicated setup. There's surface casing estimators already there online if you need to know where a base of usable quality water is. It's a 10-minute internet search, and you can tell where a base of usable quality water is. And just some regulatory, and I don't want to throw it all on the groundwater districts because a lot of our counties don't have districts. There's still counties that are a tremendous amount of wells being drilled that do not have guidance or regulatory agencies whatsoever. And I don't really want to throw it off on the Railroad Commission because I believe as an agency we have the authority and the power to be able to self-regulate.
Isn't the problem a lot to do with dollars and cents? I mean, if you don't get a 40-well drilling program because you're trying to do it right compared to somebody that'll do it cheaper, the oil companies are going to go with the cheaper guy. Or that's what I've seen in the past. I mean,
Mr. Lange, you and I sit in the same chair, right? We all bid on this work. We don't exist in a vacuum. We have to compete, right?
yes, sir.
And the only way we compete is with solid regulation and solid enforcement. If we miss the enforcement part of our regulation, then it damages us all. And that's where we're lacking, is meaningful, solid enforcement. We've got one investigator, and you work him to death. Texas is a really big state. It takes almost all day long to go from Amarillo to Austin. And he has to do this every day. You talk to Adam, he's either in Tyler, or he's up in the Panhandle, or he's over in El Paso, or he's down in Corpus Christi. No matter when you call him, he's on the road. We need solid, meaningful enforcement to stop this stuff. There are a lot of unlicensed operators out there, and they're doing their best to catch them, but if you don't turn them in, I don't turn them in, our constituents don't turn them in, we can't stop it.
You mentioned that you have an elected position. I'm assuming that's a groundwater district?
Yes, sir. I am on the groundwater district, and it's an elected position on the regional board.
Okay. Well, as a groundwater district member, like we'd mentioned a little earlier in the meeting, most of you all will find yourselves, not only in terms of groundwater, but in terms of state statute, having to follow guidelines that is normally a minimum.
Yes, sir.
Right. I've been in the industry a while, and I've helped set up a groundwater district. And normally, what I understand and what I think is fairly applicable across the state of Texas is that the groundwater situations vary almost as much as the counties do, much less a number of geophysical differences across our state as big as it is, and in the particular area we're in. So I think, I would be willing to agree that the Water Well Drillers Advisory Council, TDLR, probably could use some help in enforcement. But the reason the groundwater districts were set up legislatively, as I understood, is because of the differences of things, the challenges they'd have to meet. And there's not an ability in your district to maybe have rules that go beyond the minimums that require a pre-drilling description in your application to drill. You have an application process, don't you?
Yes, sir.
Is there any opportunities there to have your drillers, no matter what their qualifications are, submit a drilling plan and have some ability to hold them within the bounds of that?
As with all elected bodies, yes, sir. And Chapter 76 does give us the ability to provide more meaningful guidance beyond the minimum requirements. I suspect that if you look at the 100-some-odd districts that we have, that you'll find most of the districts base their construction standards at least a minimum on TDR 76, right? That's almost in all the chapters that are set up. And a few of them expound upon that and go further. But it's still an elected body that, of course, has a constituency to answer to. And yes, our district moves a little bit beyond 76, but still, it's a process, much like the process that we're dealing with today. We have started moving forward with cementing requirements, but then there's always somebody to loophole around every requirement you put in there. But we don't have necessarily the enforcement structure that the TDLR has. At least with the TDLR, you have legislative enforcement to go after licensees for compliance. All we can do as a district is turn those licensees over to TDLR for non-conformance. We can't pull their license and say, you can't drill in our district because you didn't cement properly. We have to submit that information to TDLR for enforcement.
And along with legislation, of course, that all falls back to an even more principled point of due process. So no citizen wants to be deprived of their due process, but I understand. I was a drilling contractor for 37 years in an aquifer that's a lot different than a lot of the rest of them around this state. But still, all of the differences in the aquifers make up for some opportunities in terms of consistency, in terms of enforcing a minimum compared to what applies best in your situation. And I understand also it takes a lot of support from local constituency, but you have to remember that you're not going to resolve any of those problems, even this board at the TDLR, without the involvement of constituency. And here again, I can't speak for anybody but myself, but I've served with a lot of good members on this board for a long time. And our efforts, just like this effort, has always been toward providing an opportunity to protect groundwater, but still trying to keep in mind that practical considerations are what wind up being most practically applied. And that's the reason we're considering the things we are in terms of commingling. Enforcement side of it is a budget issue. And I'll confess, I sit as a county commissioner not far from here. And it's always a budget consideration. You have a budget in your entity.
Yes, sir.
We all do. But I'm glad you came forward and spoke and gave this opinion. And like Mr. Cohort over here, I'd be glad to see your paper because we don't get as many of those as we do others.
One thing I would like to mention is, as a district, as a contractor, which I'm certainly sure that y'all can recognize this, there's a lot of districts out there. There's 100 groundwater districts out there. So would it be better for you as a contractor, as a license holder, to have to contend with 100 variations of construction standards, or would you prefer to have one construction standard you could live with? I can assure you that I can't speak for DSAL or any of the other guys, but I have spoken with some of their members, and that would be a nightmare for them to try to come up with a construction standard to meet every single district hodgepodge worth of regulations. It would be detrimental to our industry, and it's detrimental to the whole process. Cohesive guidance, I think, is at least a better step forward than a lot of small regulations. I can certainly, as a contractor, I can certainly speak to that, because almost every county now has a groundwater conservation district. So if you work in one county, then you go to the next, suddenly the rules have changed. You've got to teach all your employees, wait, we can't use that over here because they have a different rule, so unload the truck and reload for this county.
Perfect point for a contractor. I've battled it for 37 years. I understand exactly what you're saying. But it's still, as a regulatory agency or as an advisory body, those are all the constraints you have to balance with some point of reasonability. And I think, quite honestly, the effort we're making here today says we realize there could be some improvements. But it all comes back to constituency and competition.
Yes, sir.
And it's all going to boil down to the individual ethics of the given person operating the drilling rig, whether he's the licensee or not, and or the person that's supervising that. The only remaining thing you have is some type of enforcement ability. And I agree with you that as a drilling contractor, I would look forward to that. But I think an ethical driller feels like that should be part of his job because, I appreciate the presentation for the Texas Oil and Gas. And I understand they only use 1% of the groundwater in the state of Texas. But if the groundwater in the state of Texas gets to a point that the people can't live here, they're not going to have anybody to sell oil and gas to.
It's not necessarily so much the operators are the problem. I've seen some pretty high-quality operators, and their standards are pretty stout. Most of the technical infringements and violations I see are from individual landowners trying to get the cheapest deal to sell water to oil companies. Because, like I said, oil companies bear a substantial responsibility if they have an environmental issue. I mean, they're the deep pockets in the story, right?
I agree.
But your individual landowners, your one section owner, or your 500-acre owner, or your 100-acre owner, the chances of you going after them, not so much as a $10 billion oil company. And they're the ones who have just enough money to get that one well put in. But if that one well will make 200 gallons a minute, suddenly they're making $100,000 a month.
I think I'm fully aware of that, and that really puts us back to the constituency again. And, as opposed to an individual's not going to have any opportunity for guidance beyond their contractor unless they have, in their personal terms, the specific knowledges. So, it's a little bit of a round robin situation, but it normally begins with and stops with the person that wants to have a hole bored in the ground to produce water.
So leads me back to my original reason why I was here. Again, it pains me as a drilling contractor to say this, but I think we need another layer of protection when we're talking about entering brackish saline zones. I've been a drilling contractor my whole life. I've been on a drilling rig since I was old enough to plant the dirt in the back of the rig. But I just don't know that our members are qualified to make those decisions as far as where to stop at, where to cement. I mean, perhaps we are all here capable of doing that, but is everyone in our industry capable of making that assessment? And another layer may be the answer to helping alleviate some of these brackish and commingling problems that we're struggling with.
I'm going to ask a question I think I know the answer to, which is not always smart. But have you been to a committee hearing for state legislation on groundwater?
No, sir.
You need to go. It'll be a very informative circumstance for you. And I think it'll give you a little better picture of some of the same problems this advisory council and probably a number of others in the state of Texas and the staff that we have to help provide the protection we're missioned with doing. It'll give you a better understanding of let's see, the challenges that come up to separate the differences between the individual citizen and what is done for the best protection of the state and the other individuals.
I have watched quite a few of the natural resource hearings, and they get quite animated.
Go to a legislative hearing sometimes. Thank you for your input.
You're welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for the work you do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Russell? State your name and you.
My name is Roger Russell. I'm here representing the Texas Groundwater Association, which is made up of water well drillers, pump installers, manufacturers, suppliers, and groundwater scientists. My license number is 2064. That's a 1980 model. So anyway, I am a master driller, master pump installer myself. I also have a level 3 water treatment specialist license, state of Texas. I've been in business. In other words, when I started drilling, I think Elvis Presley was still singing live. So, but anyway, our position, the Groundwater Association's position on commingling is no commingling. Whether it be salt water, fresh water, there'd be no commingling. And with the issue of, as our challenges for water become increasing more and more and more, and to where we're getting into the using of the salt water, my question is, how are we going to regulate the construction of this? I'm like the gentleman that spoke before me, and what I handed y'all there was just some reports that we just took about 12 minutes to collect yesterday morning. And we looked at 12 water well reports. Now, these weren't in any of the ladies' districts that spoke earlier for their benefit, but most of them, for the exception of one, are oil and gas related. And I have drilled in the oil and gas industry throughout my career also. So what I'm saying, 80% of them that we looked at would not meet the requirements, not the requirements today or not the requirements 20 years ago. And if these same type of people, like the gentleman before me was saying, if they're going to be the ones constructing these wells, what type of assurance do we have that we don't have salt water coming up inside of the freshwater zones? And whether it's commingling 30,000 parts per million or 20,000 parts per million salt water, for some that sounds like cold weather, whether it's 20 below or 40 below. There is a difference. And again, I want to say that our association's position is that we have no commingling. And I realize that what we have, these gentlemen, the regulators that we have here, they are overrun. There's no way, their job is they face an impossible task. It'd be like sending you fellas down there to protect the Mexican border. You know, you're gonna get overrun, and I think that's what these guys have got going on. And these contractors, what my experience has been, and I'm a driller, I'm a well driller, is that they have no intentions of constructing that well correctly when they go out. They obviously haven't read the rules and regulations, or they are completely disregarding them. And we've made at our company, we do a cement from the top of the gravel to the top of the ground. And this eliminates the issue of whether is this zone bad or is this zone good. Now also something else I'd point out, on those well reports, if you look at the database, was there a water tested? In most cases, no. Unless it's a municipal type supply well, that water is not tested. And I know what it takes to do that type of testing. We've done testing from 3,000 feet to shallow. I know what it takes to do it. I know it's very expensive. But our position is this, is there should be no commingling, whether it's inside the casing or outside the casing. That's our position. Might have been more than 3 minutes, but it wasn't bad.
Any questions?
No question.
Roger,
Yes, sir.
I've got an 843 license number, which is a classic.
It's getting a year old.
So,
And-
I guess, excuse me, I didn't.
And the position I've always had is that the casing should be cemented from the top of the producing zone to the surface. And
Yes, sir.
I've worked on that for years. We got in the new rule about 3 years ago that covered that to a large extent. And I appreciate what you say because you're right. If it's a rule to do it from the producing zone to the surface, you eliminate all the other guesswork from there to the surface. It's taken care of in one step. I appreciate you.
And also, the regulation that is written as it is, I've read over it time and time again. The regulations are good. They're solid. I believe they're solid. I believe a lot of the contractors look at the atmospheric barrier, the 10-foot minimum, and they say that's good enough. And in some cases it is. Some cases it's sufficient, like Texas is a large state. But for the most parts, we have not only the major and minor aquifers, but we have, just because it's a major or minor aquifer doesn't mean that all the strata that we drill through doesn't produce some type of water. We don't know. We got chromium-6 and we got, who knows what we have slipping into that borehole, getting down to the gravel pack, into the production zone, whether it's for oil and gas operation or for a homeowner or for a municipal water supply, which that's what we do most of is municipal work. And, but we do some of all of it. And I do some, our work now is very limited in the oil field because of just price-wise, because of our practice, the way that we do a full cement job on it. That eliminates us price-wise. We elect to not participate in it if we have to do a lesser job than what we think is necessary. But also, if you look at those well reports there, we've got 6-inch casing going in a 7 7/8 hole, and we're reporting cement down to 60 feet. Now, I'm pretty good, but I ain't that good. Some of these things that these guys have done, they're reporting, they're putting on there we've done a lot of things, our company. But I can't do those things. I don't have magic or anything else. And it certainly doesn't meet the standards that are out there. And what I say is we're going to have a concentrated effort between everyone to change this. Now, I'm determined to change it, and we have the groundwater district, we have the TDLR, and you gentlemen, we have our associations. And what we would like to see with our groundwater association, and we would like to see a push to change the mentality of contractors, because it's contractors that's obviously making these violations. The contractor can say, yes, I'll do that, or no, I will not. It's the contractors. And Mr. Gunn back here, there's no way, if you look at the well reports, there's no way that they can visit all these people, that they can, I'm sure he's limited to 40 hours a week. I understand their dilemma in this. I understand the groundwater district's dilemma in their budgets. I understand that. I'm fortunate. You saw the two groundwater districts that's present here, that's next to me, and scale to 1 to 10, they're 10 or more. Not all of them are that way. We have a county next to us that they rejected going to a groundwater district. Also in their county, though, in that area, though, we have saline water, we have methane gas. There's all kind of critters within the freshwater zones where people produce from. And typically what we'll get is what you see there is a 10-foot, 15-foot barrier, something like that. And I question that. I question their ability to put the cement down in some of the places that they said that they did in the construction of it. But what we would like to see again is how can we ensure that the integrity of our water zones, whether it be saltwater zones or freshwater zones, are protected for the future. Someday we're going to have to answer for the things that we've done in the past, and we can change that, and I think we can start changing that now. What I'm saying, the Texas Groundwater Association's pressing the on button, and what we expect is for people involved to do something to help us get to that point, to get to the point where contractors become more conscientious of their work ethics of what they're doing. And with regards to the Texas oil and gas bill here, and I heard how I know what type of economy, the way that they really give Texas a shot in the arm, and even from them, they can request it. Operators, drillers operating on their places will follow the rules and regulations. That would be easy done. I've worked in for some of them where we go in and relieve gas where it's escaped into the groundwater, or salt water where it's escaped in there, and I know how they are with safety and those type of things. I know they can incorporate contractors following the rules and regulations of the state of Texas.
Roger, one of the problems that we have is, and it may be a minor problem, but there are drillers out there that are not licensed. They do not care about the regulations. And the people that hire them do not care about anything but the price to get water for them to use. We have the ability, the TDLR, to administer administrative penalties, and your reputable dealers or licensees are going to pay those if they've made a mistake. But the other guys, they don't care. You can put as many administrative penalties on me as you want to. If I'm not licensed, then what are you going to do to me? I don't have to pay it. I just ignore you until they come out and confiscate your old rig or something for it, and then they go down the street and buy another one, and they're back out on the street drilling the next day. How do you combat that? How do we combat that? It's hard.
Yes, sir.
And that's one of the problems we have to deal with.
That's the trouble with living in a civilized society. We can't take appropriate action.
I understand what you're saying.
I guess my question, without drifting too much, and I don't want to get to drifting away from the subject, but the TGWA, the association, the outlook on this is would y'all want us to pursue the TDLR and the work group that we put together? Would y'all want us to pursue and keep our efforts in changing these rules or modifying these rules to where they would make a better bottom end or a better substructure for it? If, like, say, if a water district wanted to improve it to a minimum standard, do you want us to work on these rules to go forward with them, or do y'all like them like they're written, or how do y'all want?
We're happy as they're written, but if it's we're not opposed to an improvement, I don't believe. You know, we're always, and maybe I'll just say I'm speaking for myself, but I would think for the majority of the members, it's a large membership, you understand, and but if a groundwater district needed something, well, of course, they need a new tool in their regulation. I'm not opposed to that at all, personally. Our construction standards at our company will meet anyone's or exceed. And that's the easiest way for me to construct a well. I never have to apologize for that, and I know some conditions, that doesn't always work. So I'm just saying, in East Texas or where we operate, it does.
Mr. Chairman, this is Lee Parham. We will look at those, well, David and Adam will look at the reports that Mr. Russell submitted. And also, if I could get a clarification from John Pyburn, the rules that you were mentioning that were passed 3 years ago of cementing from the production zone back up, that's a district, right? That was your district?
Well, no, the state rules, if the production zone underlies an inferior zone, then you have to cement back up or grout.
Okay, I just needed clarification. Thank you.
And in that case, those reports there, you have a Carrizo overlying Wilcox, and traditionally in all of those, I'll assure you the Carrizo is a lower pH and usually contains iron from slight to high. The Wilcox is normally a pH of 8 or higher with generally low limits of iron. And but under those reports that I handed you, the Carrizo can feed into the underlying zone, the Wilcox zone. There's even one where the gravel pack is 10 feet below the top of the screen. Also, one of those reports, I did mark out the names of the contractor that drilled it and
You
the owner.
marked that out?
Sir?
You marked out the name of the driller?
I marked it out because the lady that owns that property now is a friend of mine. I know the driller. He's a friend and a neighbor, but I mean, I'm not opposed to you searching and looking, but that particular well, I'm going to take care of that well myself personally, and because
Okay.
this lady, she just bought this property and is unaware of the problems, and but yeah, if you just go to the database and look, it's a free for all, and if you understand the rules and regulations, we've got a tremendous amount of work to do, and it's just been a mindset of for as long as I can remember to do it fast and do it cheap, and but that's not going to work. So we wouldn't build airplanes this way. If we did, we'd all be afraid to fly, and.
Thank you, Mr. Russell.
Thank you. Thank y'all for the opportunity.
This is all of the public comment, people that have signed up for public comment. So is that, do we need to continue on?
No, Mr. Chairman, this is Lee. We can wrap it up here. Everybody was given the opportunity to say their piece and filled out a public comment form, so this portion can wrap up.
Okay, then we'll move to adjournment.
Yes, sir.
One comment, unless I missed a motion, I don't think we approved the minutes of the January 5th meeting.
Well, this is,
Oh,
that's a
Mary-
1 o'clock meeting.
Oh, okay, the 1 o'clock meeting.
Yes,
Okay.
Mary Winston Taylor, you will be with us all day.
Well, no, I was aware of that. I've got it blanked out.
So,
We certainly thank y'all for all your comments and everything, and we'll all be taken into consideration for sure. A lot of good ideas come out of deals like this, and I think it's just outstanding. We had this many people involved in this, and we really thank you very much for your input.
So we're adjourned to what, or do we need a motion for adjournment?
yes, we need a motion for adjournment.
Motion.
One second.
Motion by Mr. Stivers, second by Mr. Reed. All in favor?
Aye.
All not in favor? None. Motion passes. The summit